Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. So, wherever you're joining us again today, we want to say welcome. Thank you for joining us in this journey. Every week, I feel like there's something new and exciting to bring to the table. The Bible is just filled with us because, again, it's an ancient text. And so when you delve in, when we do the difficult work, there's always some kind of gem that pops up, right? Sometimes we have 45 minutes of just unpacking, unraveling so many good things. And other times it's 30 minutes and we got a couple gems, but it was worth it, right? There's always something deep we can pull from it. And so today we're going to finish off chapter 35. And there's some really beautiful little gems here and there throughout there that I want to share with you that I think you're going to enjoy. We're going to discuss the 12 tribes. It's going to be really good. I'm excited for you to join us today. And so, as always, we want to remind you, we look at this book responsibly, right? We look at Torah and I would argue a different way than many people do, often in Christian circles, right? We're not looking at any of the modern translations today that are more Eurocentric. What we're doing is we're looking at the actual Jewish perspective, right? The people who wrote the books, who compiled all the stories. We're looking at what they had to say first, right? What the words meant, who the audience was, all of those things. And so we do deep study. These books behind me, we spend hours just delving into all the different interpretations, all the different words. And so we can bring you something interesting every week. And so today, again, as we've done for almost 2 years now, we are almost gearing up to finishing in Genesis. And so this has been a really in-depth study. But just a reminder again, and most of you could do this line on your own, couldn't you? Right? You know the dates, 587 BC. Israel is captive in Babylon. The reason they are compiling Torah in the first place was not, again, it was not to write a perfectly sealed, accurate history with perfect timelines, literal dates, names, ages, all of those things. That was never the intention, right? The intention, you know, I know, we know this, the intention of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the intention was to essentially create a compilation of all of those stories, poems, wisdoms, metaphors, all of it, so that they did not assimilate, so that they could keep their Jewish traditions alive for the future generations. So again, Torah is a written response to assimilation. And this is why, again, for them, when they see the Torah, this scroll brought out, there's so much joy, right? There's so much celebration because what they're seeing is their identity reflected back. And so with that in mind, I think that's such a beautiful way to approach the Bible, right? The Bible is a group of people essentially putting their traditions and their values into a lot of metaphor, poetry, wisdom tellings, all of those things in order that they might hold on to what it means to be Jewish. Essentially, they are keeping Judaism kosher, right? That's the idea. And so when we read Genesis, we approach it that way. And after we find those beautiful meanings of what it meant to be a Jew, what it meant to essentially not assimilate, then we begin to apply it to today. So let's delve in and do that now. So Genesis 35, 16 through 29. That's what we're going to look at today. So I'll start reading. And as always, I'll read the text first, and then we'll go back and we'll start dissecting it. So here we go. Verse 16. And they journeyed from Bethel, and there was still some distance to come from Ephrath. And Rachel gave birth, and her labor was difficult. It came to pass when she had such difficulty giving birth that the midwife said to her, "Do not be afraid, for this one too is a son for you." And it came to pass when her soul departed, for she died, that she named him Benoi, but his father called him Benjamin. All right, so it's two different names, interesting enough. So Rachel died, and she was buried on the road to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. Yeah, again, remember this idea of Bethlehem, very interesting, important for the Jewish people. Bethlehem is where Rachel is married. It continues. And Jacob erected a monument on her grave that is the tombstone of Rachel until this day, right? 21, Israel journeyed and he pitched his tent at some distance past the tower of Idar. And it came to pass when Israel sojourned in that land that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine. And Israel heard of it, and so the sons of Jacob were now 12. The sons of Leah were Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, and Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant, Dan and Naphtali. The sons of Zilpah, Leah's maidservant, Gad and Asher. And these are Jacob's sons who were born to him in Paddan Aram. And Jacob came to his father Isaac, to Mamre, Kiriath Arab, which is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac dwelt. And the days of Isaac were 180 years. And Isaac expired and died and was gathered to his peoples, old and stated with days, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. So there we go. We have an ending to one story and kind of the continuation of another story of Jacob and Esau, yet Isaac here passes away. So let's delve in now. Here we go. Verse 1. Notice this. They journeyed to Bethel. All right, we have some mileage now. We have some mileage with this word Bethel. Most of you now probably remember what the word means. It means the presence of God, right? The house of God. And so notice this. He journeys from the house of God to, notice this word here, there, Ephrath. So he journeys from the house of God. He had spent time in the presence of the divine. And now he's heading toward Ephrath, which means, get this, the fruitful place. One might call another word, they might say paradise. Yeah, you get it. Paradise. It's another word for paradise. It's a beautiful, at the very highest level, I would argue it's a beautiful metaphor. Lowest level, it's literalism, and it's what they call them afterwards. You choose your journey there. But the idea here is after you have spent time with the divine, after you have spent time in the presence of God, in the presence of wisdom, right? After you've spent that time, you are ready to move toward the fruitfulness of that moment. You're ready to experience the positive effects of that experience. Good things are about to happen. And so you begin walking toward that fruitful place. That's the idea. And so for Israel, they choose to be fruitful and multiply. That's the idea. And so verse 16 again, Rachel gave birth, and her labor, it says, was difficult. So I want you to remember this. Again, this is a story not just about Rachel. It's not a story about Jacob. This is a story about Israel. Israel is the main character. When I say Israel, I mean the nation of Israel. Israel sees themselves in the story. So understand this. The first birth of a nation, any nation, think of a nation. I think of America. That's where I'm at, right? The birth of a nation always involves birth pains, doesn't it? There are painful growth moments. I think about all of us growing up when we were younger. We experienced growing pains, didn't we? Yeah, our knees would kind of hurt. My son is experiencing this right now as he's playing soccer. You have these growing pains, right? Things are shifting and changing, not just up here in your prefrontal cortex, but it's also changing in your body. You are experiencing growing pains. And so your limbs are experiencing all these things. But the thing is, the deeper idea for Israel as a nation, they are experiencing shifts and turns, painful changes, deep mistakes, painful mistakes. And this goes, I would argue, for us too, right? When you experience the divine and then you step out, you're beginning to collect those fruits, right? You are going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. You're learning. And I think sometimes we're really hard on ourselves. We stepped away from the thing that brought pain and brokenness. We stepped into life. And then at some point, though, we're going to have to start stumbling forward, aren't we? And to expect the stumbling forward to be easy would be insanity, right? It would be an unrealistic expectation. And so the idea for Israel is we are a young nation. We're a very young nation. It's going to be painful. Those birth pains are not going to be easy, but out of birth comes beautiful new life. And so there's going to be new life, but we're going to make mistakes along the way. We are going to be learning. This is the message that almost every rabbinical interpretation there is has to say about this moment. It's a reminder to Israel, things are not going to be as smooth sailing as we'd like. However, we are going to be moving in the right direction. There are going to be birth pains. It keeps going in verse 17. Even though you're having birth pains, notice the advice here. Do not be afraid, for this one too is a son for you. Notice that, the advice, don't be afraid. Yes, it's scary. Yes, it's going to be terrifying for your people. It's going to be daunting. You're going to stumble. There's going to be pain, but that is going to be expected. It's a birth, right? Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. You were in the presence of the divine. Now you're stepping forward. The idea again, yes, we know she passes away, right? She dies after birth or during birth, some will argue. But the deeper idea here is for Israel. You're going to go through birth pains. Don't be afraid. It may be painful. Don't be afraid. There are things that are going to die in your past, but there are going to be new birth things that will happen in your future. So don't be afraid, right? That's the idea. And so we'll keep going. Verse 18. And it came to pass when her soul departed, for she died, that she named him Ben-Oni. Interesting, right? Ben-Oni. The word here is fascinating because Jacob will actually change the name. Just like Jacob's name had been shifted, right? We have a shift in a name here. So a name change right from the beginning. Ben-Oni, the son of my pain. Interesting. Yeah. The one that came from the pain, the birth, the painful moment. And so this idea I find really interesting. Jacob will see this and he'll say, you know what? Yes, it's painful. Yes, there was death. But out of that pain, out of that brokenness, out of the death of my wife, there is life. I have a son. And for that culture, a son would have been one of the most beautiful blessings one could have. And so the idea there again, the name gets changed. You'll see that in a moment. But I also wanted to note this. When her soul departed, many times we get caught up in these questions of like, where does the soul go when you die? I have people all the time that will ask me, Tony, do you believe in heaven? I have students at the school I teach at. They'll ask me, do you believe that you go up to heaven when you die? Or you go to hell when you die? What do you think happens, Mr. Werfel? And I always have to be careful because I teach at a public school, but I have great answers for this because I've pulled these answers from the deepest Jewish rabbis I can think of. And here's the idea that they always give. The idea that they give here is pretty simple. They say, you'll know when you know, right? And so it's interesting. The soul departed from her. For Jewish people, they had this beautiful image, and it looked like this. A person dies, and when they die, the breath that was first given to them by the divine, it goes out from them. The breath goes out from them. The soul, whatever the thing is, the consciousness, it goes. But here's the beauty of it. Rabbis would come together and they would argue sometimes what happens to the breath. Where does the breath go? But at the end of the day, they would always do this. Whether they would have a drink together over it or laugh about it or whatever it was, shake hands, they would always say this, you'll know when you know. Because we can't know for sure. We can't know for certain. And so their answer is, you'll know when you know. But at some point when you die, the breath, the beautiful picture for them is the breath goes back to the source. Is that literal breath? Is it a spirit? Is it whatever? You'll know when you know. What a beautiful idea there. You'll know when you know. You can just trust that it's good. Believe that it's good. How about saying that? You can believe that it's good. Yeah. Let me keep going. And Jacob, however, names him Benjamin. Benjamin is an interesting concept here. The word Benjamin actually means Benjamin, not Benjamin. It means to continually travel south. That's an interesting one, right? Continually traveling south. So to travel north is to find peace, is to find shalom. To travel south is a different concept. Notice this. Benjamin is less a literal tribe and more the direction a tribe moves when losing their ethic and values. To be Benjamin is to be continually moving away from life. Yeah, let me say it again. I know we've got some different noises happening periodically, but catch this. Benjamin is less a literal tribe and more the direction a tribe moves when losing their ethic and values. To be Benjamin is to be continually moving away from the ethic, from that life. So heavy. Again, these are metaphorical characters. But also you could say they're literal too, maybe. But the idea here is that Israel sees themselves here, right? Israel sees that at various different times, they moved away from their ethic. They moved away from their morals. They moved away from their values. And Benjamin becomes that tribe that good, bad, and ugly, you kind of experience a lot of those things through Benjamin. So let's keep going. Verse 19. So Rachel died, and she was buried on the road to Ephrath. So sometimes, again, this is an interesting one. Rachel, his wife, right, the one that he worked so hard for, doesn't get to experience the fruitful and multiply. She doesn't get to experience Ephrath, right, the paradise, the place of beauty, the place of multitude, the promised land, one might say. And this is kind of a sad moment when you think about it, but also remember, this is a story about Israel. When I read this part, it was almost heartbreaking because the image came up over and over again for their commentators, and they always said something to the effect of this. They always said, there will be some in captivity, and there are some from the past in captivity, that though they were older, they were not able to experience freedom. Yet, here was the purpose of the old. The ones who were living under Roman captivity, Babylonian captivity, Egyptian captivity. There were some people who were not going to experience freedom because they were going to die before. But the idea here is so beautiful because their role then is to help sustain the young in order that when they leave captivity, they will experience shalom, fullness, promised land. And they can only fully experience promised land because the wisdom voices during captivity were sustaining them. Yeah, so good. And a question, of course, for me is, if a culture has moved away from wisdom voices, what's sustaining them? Yeah, what is sustaining them? Entertainment? Right? What is the sustenance for them if it's not wisdom? Because for Israel, they were saying the thing that's going to sustain us is going to be those wisdom voices that will die during captivity, but those voices will create monuments and stories and rituals that will sustain us and move us into the promised land. And that's, again, really a bigger picture of Torah, isn't it? It's Torah. Torah will sustain us. It's the gift that the old who have passed away have given us as we move on our way toward the promised land. Such a beautiful picture. Yeah, there's so much richness to this, isn't it? It keeps going. And Jacob erected a monument. So again, the monument, he creates the story, the ritual. Torah is compiled. We have to remember Rachel. We have to remember the story. We have to remember the older ancient wisdom people, the ancient writing, the ancient voices. Those are the ones. We have to remember them. More importantly, we have to remember their wisdom. 21. Israel journeyed, and notice this, he pitched his tent at some distance past the tower of Edar. And so this is kind of a cool concept. And this is one I read about a lot as I was delving into the commentaries. Before entering the promised land, the idea here is with the Tower of Edar, whether you want to believe it's a literal place or symbolic place, the idea of the tower was you're up at a high place, and Edar, you are able to view where you've been, and where you're going. And there's enough room for you and you alone. Are you seeing it? Before you really step into the promised land, there is a time of reflection. And so for Israel, again, it's a really cool idea. Sometimes they needed a moment. Sometimes they needed to be able to see the world with this interesting panoramic view, to see where we've been, where we're heading, where we might go, where we might end up if we choose this or this or this or this. And again, this is again another reference toward Torah. Torah has been called the tower, right? The place of Eden, the place, the place where we're able to view the whole thing in fullness. And so he goes to this tower, he views the story, he views his people, he says, this is where we're going, this is where we've been. And I thought about for us in our journey too. How important is it to stop sometimes, especially before making big decisions, right? Stop sometimes, ask some of the bigger questions, maybe take time to recharge, right? Recharge, be fully present. And when you do, you can be in that new thing more fully. You can experience it in better, fuller ways. You will get there without all of the baggage that you're carrying because you've stopped and you've taken time to look at the story, look at the journey fully. And this is what Israel does here, which again, I find so fascinating. We'll keep going. Verse 21, this is an odd one. This is an odd little piece that's put into the story. It goes like this. Reuben went and he lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine. And Israel heard of it, and so the sons of Jacob were now 12. So first off, where did Israel get the 12 tribes? Well, of course they're gonna put in the narrative, right? They're gonna put in the narrative. But here's another idea, one that comes up, and it's a little bit, it's confusing. It's kind of complex in some ways, but basically the idea here is Reuben is attempting to have a power grab. He grabs power from his father. Right? He's going to, and again, think of Abraham, Isaac, the other ways. He's going to fulfill the promise in his own way, right? He kind of falls for the same thing that his fathers and grandfathers before him does. But also think about this. This is another idea. Israel as a nation, right? They are learning to become resilient. And so they create opportunity where there is none. So think about it that way. There's a couple different commentaries on that idea. Israel, when there is no opportunity, they sometimes create one. And that's another interesting concept. And we'll see later on, we'll understand this concept of Reuben and how he kind of takes advantage here. We'll see that in chapter 49. So we'll get more of that a little bit later. But just from a surface point of view, Jacob, his son Reuben, is taking power and he's creating opportunity where there was none, which again is a reference toward Israel, an element of Israel. So let's delve into the names. So 23, you get this list of the different 12 tribes where they came from. So you have Leah, right? Leah was the oldest sister. And so Leah, she has Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun. Good. And then we have the sons of Rachel. Joseph, Benjamin. But then you also have Bilhah, who was Rachel's maidservant, and she had Dan and Naphtali. Again, you've got these four women, big family. And then the sons of Zilpah, who was, again, Leah's maidservant, Gad and Asher. So why the names? What's the purpose? Let's look at it. Check this out. The 12 tribes, these different names, of course, have meaning. And so let's look at this meaning because it makes a whole lot more sense. Why name them this? Why 12? It's all there. Watch this. Reuben, firstborn, he's considered the honored one, right? He's the firstborn because the firstborn's supposed to get the honor, right? Even though in this story we know, just like Jacob and Esau, someone else will pop up and try to take that blessing. Simeon, the obedient one. We have Levi, that literally means we are all one. We're working together as one. Judah is the praised one. Issachar means that the reward is mine. That's the idea of that word. Zebulun means basically honor. This is like a very patriarchal kind of manly honor. We have Joseph. He's going to add to, which is really fascinating when you look at the story of Jacob. Jacob will add to his people. Everything he does will basically multiply them. So that's the idea of Jacob. Benjamin, son of the right hand. Yeah. Judge, deliverer is Dan. Naphtali is the one that wrestles, right? And again, we get this idea because Israel also has the idea of wrestle. Then you have Naphtali of Gad, which is fortune, the one that's fortunate. The word could even be considered kind of like lucky. And then last, Asher, which means like the laughing one, the happy one, the one that's joyful. And so the 12 tribes, many people try to make convoluted ideas about this, but I think this was one of the best quotes I've found about the 12 tribes. Let me read it to you. The 12 tribes of Israel stand for the unity and diversity of the Jewish people, in Jewish lore. Each tribe held a special characteristic of Judaism. So I get this all the time. Tony, were these literal tribes or were they not? And my answer is sure. Could be both. I don't know. I know this, that when Jewish people read this, they see Judaism in its fullness because 12, the idea of the 12 was you have the fullness of the tribe. 12 was that full number here. And so this is why, again, why does Jesus have 12 disciples? Well, it's all connected to looking back at the 12 tribes, right? He's going to have the fullness of Torah behind him. He becomes the living, walking Torah everywhere he goes. This is the idea. And so 12, the fullness. And so when you look at each one of these concepts, they actually even have colors dedicated to each one, flags. They have animals, pictures dedicated for each one. Dan, the serpent, right? The crafty, cunning one. Judah, brave, leads. There's the ideas of creativity, wisdom, grace, nature, all of that. Scholar, they all have their own specifics. And yet, the interesting thing here is every tribe has a deeper idea of how Israel acts as a whole. It's the characteristic, the picture of Israel as like a family. And so think about this. When they're divided, these blessings become curses. But when they're united, those blessings are blessings, right? These blessings are good things. But when they're divided, they use those blessings against each other. Interesting, right? The cunning one becomes cunning snake-like. When they're working together, it's crafty, it's intellectual. You see my point. When we work together, we become a blessing. When we fight each other, we become a curse. And so again, when we come together in our differences, there's a lot of beauty and connection, right? I think this is such an applicable thing for us, especially right now, right? With so much division in our culture, when we're united, powerful, powerful things happen. We can use all of that potential, all of that energy, creativity, the different gifts we have, we can use those things to add to the mix to create something beautiful and unified. When we fight against one another, that's when brokenness happens. That's when terrible experiences take place. That's when we have fights and rioting and all those things. We fight against one another. That's what takes place. And so the question again was for them, what are we going to do? Will the 12 tribes unite or will they divide? Will we act as one or will we scatter? And we're going to find out as we read Genesis. But notice this, how it ends. 27, 28, and 29. We have the death of Isaac, right? And so Isaac dies there, basically in Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac dwelt. And so the days of Isaac, 180 years, which again, we know this number to be the idea that he lived a full, rich life. He attained wisdom, right? Is that a literal number, 180? Why exactly 180? Why are all these people dying with like zeros and not just 184? Because the idea here was Isaac has obtained not just a fullness of life, he's actually become the wisdom voice. That's the idea. He has lived a full, rich life, and he has contributed to the wisdom of his people. And that's when you're dying at 180, right? 120. These numbers, that's what they mean. They become the wisdom voices that help the younger generations walk in the promised land. And it's so good. So folks, I hope you enjoyed this today. This was a lot of fun. So, how do we take it home? I love this idea that we almost ended there with how to embrace diversity. And I know when I say that, some people are going to cringe, some people are going to celebrate. Right? Some people start going critical race theory, yay, or critical race theory, yes, or no, or whatever the thing is. Diversity is actually a beautiful, beautiful thing. But I think we've gotten so caught up in our little canals, our own ideas, our rigid views. I think diversity is a really beautiful thing, and it's a very biblical idea. And so I wanted to share with you some Jewish concepts that I pulled from different rabbis. And so let me share with you some of these. How do we embrace diversity? For them, it was how do we embrace diversity as a Jewish nation? Here are some of their perspectives, and I want to kind of apply it for us today generally in 2022. So one of them is read broadly. I like this idea. If you want to embrace diversity, read broadly. Beautifully written prose allows you to basically step into other people's shoes, even if it's like only momentarily, right? Read books from different perspectives, timelines, different time periods. Introduce your children, right, to a variety of different literature, right, from different places around the world. Introduce them to it. Look for authors who can write really engaging, informative books without being super preachy, right? Read broadly. Take time to look at all different varying perspectives. And I get it. We like the perspectives we agree with most. But the truth is, if we're only reading from the one perspective, we actually get really myopic views. And before you know it, the only thing we're saying is just mimicking the other voice. But if we can read from different perspectives, we actually gain a deeper appreciation for all sides involved. We stop demonizing the one or the other. We can find fault in both, but we can also find beauty in both. And that's when reading broadly comes in handy. And with that, I like this idea here. Choose your media wisely. This is so important right now. Web surfing, media streaming, the world basically just clicks away, right? And so in minutes, we can connect with a group on Facebook. We can follow blogs, watch television. Choose media that's going to reflect values of inclusiveness. Right? Choose media that's not going to have a bunch of overgeneralizations, which is sometimes hard. Doesn't basically mock religious, ethnic, cultural, social groups, those kind of things. Look for one that's open-minded at least. And also, with that said, take time with your media to try to look at all the different perspectives too. Right? Maybe you watch CNN. Take some time to watch Fox, or maybe you watch Fox. Take some time to watch CNN. Understand their perspectives. And when you do, I would argue you begin to be a more well-rounded person. The media you watch is important. And so being aware of which side of the media you're on, what you're watching, what their intent is, what their values are, what the bend is, that's so important. And it also will enrich you to become a more diverse person. Next one, look to meet new people. I think this is so good. Take time, look for opportunities to get to know people outside of your circle. I have a friend at the school who works there. His name's Hamadi. He's just an incredible person. His story is very, very different than mine. He was born in Africa. He came over to New York, and he's lived a very different life than me. And now he's in Idaho, and we have these really enriching stories. Well, I'll just ask him, hey, I've heard this perspective from other people, or the news will talk about this. What's it like from your perspective? And I'll tell you, his perspective is very different than others in my area. And it's so fun for me to hear because I get enriched from the conversation. I am constantly asking him, what are your thoughts on this? And when I get that perspective, even if I don't fully agree with it, it's so much fun to just hear other perspectives, and I can begin to appreciate and understand the diversity all around me. Meet new people. And with that, try something new. I love this idea. Anytime we step outside of our comfort zone, we build understanding. So I was thinking about this. Visit a play. Go to a concert, a religious service that's outside of your norm. Try different things. I have tried so many different religious services. I've gone to a Catholic service. I've gone to a mass. I've gone to Jewish festivals and feast days. I've been to different Christian, from conservative to ultra liberal. I've done it all. And I can tell you, because of that, it's really enriched my understanding. And I've been able to say, I really like this about this thing. This may not fit, but it's really enriched me because I've learned to just try something new, be able to open up and understand that perspective. And then lastly, challenge the stereotypes. And I love this one. Be aware the language you use to describe certain groups. And I mean, asking yourself, is that an accurate portrayal, right? Is it a fair portrayal? Is it a fair understanding? If not, perhaps it's maybe time to challenge it or change it. Because the truth is, we all have certain biases, right? We all grew up with certain values, certain ideas, certain narratives. And so understanding we all have biases, and we get that, we can take that with us in a conversation. We can say, hey, I'm coming from this perspective. Where are you coming from? Seeking to understand that is going to help us develop enriching relationships. And that's really the end goal for me. Enriching relationships that are going to help me build more and more diverse conversations and connections. So everyone, I hope you enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun for me. Those 12 tribes, so rich, so beautiful. When they work together, there's blessing. When they fight, when they work against each other, those blessings become curses. So everyone, love you. Thanks so much for joining us. As always, please go to ethos-church.org/donate. We are, again, a tax-deductible donation place. We are an organization that we thrive on those donations. It helps us continue the work we do every single week. And if you want to join us in live conversations, go to our Ethos Living Rooms page. So much fun. And as always, hit that subscribe button, pound that like button, share these videos with friends. We are going to be finishing at some point soon, and it's going to be so much fun to look back and be able to share this playlist with people. I think that's when we begin to really see numbers rise. When we share a whole playlist with people and we say, here is a full series of the book of Genesis. I actually cannot wait to do this. I can't wait to share with people and say, I have a playlist of almost 2 years worth of studies, deep studies, word for word, verse by verse studies of the book of Genesis. Check it out. That to me is going to be so exciting when we finish. It's going to be a thrill to be able to show people. Anyways, folks, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week when we delve into chapter 36. Everyone, take care. We'll see you. Bye.